Today's Meta Monday episode is a little different. With the meta results from CoreTCG's regionals from March 16th, one thing that I wanted to do was a visual comparison of the top 16 Numemon decks that placed. While there were some immediate similarities, the one text and vastly different choices are something that I wanted to discuss. Normally I'd be throwing up a deck profile here, but honestly I think the visual of what is similar will greatly help for the discussion. In total, from CoreTCG's regional there were 4 Numemon decks that would place in the top 16. Chase Smythe at 13th place, Anthony Winks at 11th place, Alejandro Gonzalez at 8th place, and Nicholas Hutchins at 4th place. For the first time I think in the Digimon trading card game, I'm actually going to analyze card by card the ratios between these decks. Deck ratio wise, not a single player had identical ratios to anybody else. Surprisingly, the 13th place list had the lowest level 3 count out of all of our Numemon players in the top 16, while our 4th place list had the highest number of level 3s. But when looking at the overall similarities, out of the 54 to 55 cards for each deck list, only 47.3% of the deck, a little less than half, was exactly the same, down to the Digimon and number of copies. BT11 Garurumon provides ways for Numemon players to cycle through the deck, while the Monzaemon X and Numemon X are both x-antibody variants for the respective Digimon that give DP reduction effects or the ability to float into a body. Waru Monzaemon provides that D-Digivolve ability which can get around some elements of protection, while the lower end of the Eggs and Ukomon are just an absolute must for additional card draw and an extra breeding phase. But the last card that would sit in all players' decks would be the RB1 Monzaemon. The value of this card in particular is that this is just a staple at 4 copies, and because it came from a set that has very low pull rates, it's not guaranteed in every single box. But from here, this is where a lot of the deck deviates heavily from everything else. I'll be going over the choices in chronological level order. For the level 2s, again we already saw Sunomon, but for our 13th place deck, this deck opted not to go with the 5th egg despite running 4 Ukomons. For decks that run Ukomon, I strongly suggest the 5th egg, because you can burn through your eggs relatively quickly, especially if you see multiple Ukomons in a single game. Our 11th place list switched things up with Kyo-Kyomon from BT15 to utilize the reboot mechanic of Satsuki Tamehime for the reboot, while the remaining list ran EX5 Togemon for the deletion draw if it's your opponent's turn. While I can justify Kyo-Kyomon, I do think that you must be running more copies of Satsuki Tamehime to make it work for that inheritable reboot. But when you move to level 3s outside of Ukomon, the variance is very noticeable. For that 13th place list, we have Chumon and Agumon as their secondary and tertiary rookies. Starter Deck 15 Agumon can add additional memory tricks, but ultimately I see Chumon being another common factor for the fact that in the mirror, stopping your opponent from gaining memory can be very important. While this is true for all decks, only Chase would choose to run 4 copies of Chumon, while Anthony would split and go with both Chumon and Chikurimon for what I can only postulate, as counters to Digicross decks and more importantly, Death Xmon. Interestingly, Promo Dorumon would find its way into Alejandro's build, which can honestly play a lot of your middle end cards and bottom end, while Nicholas would take the spice up another notch with BT11 Agumon X. Personally, I think the Agumon X really works, and in my mind I have a particular top end I'm testing, which I'll discuss in this video. Level 4s have been mostly spoken about, being the Garurumon and Numemon X cards. But the BT14 Numemon that can play Satsuki Tamehime from your hand underneath it, and the RB1 Numemon are the only level 4 options that players really tinkered with in terms of ratios. Only Chase again would opt for additional Garurumon targets from BT15. Chase and Alejandro would have the highest number of level 4 targets while Anthony would have the lowest number of level 4s. I have nothing to add to the level 5 category, because while there was a 47.3% 1-to-1 identical use of cards, 38% was actually derived from the level 5s, since everybody used the same level 5s and exact same ratios. For the level 6s, our 4th place list from Nicholas would have the lowest number of level 6s, while Alejandro's 8th place list would have the most. The commonality here was typically Venusmon at 2 copies, while Nicholas would opt for only Platinum Numemon and a single copy of Quantumon. Don't get me wrong, Quantumon is absurd considering it gets around protection and gives you a sneak preview of your opponent's security. However, Platinum Numemon is just mandatory for its on-play playability and cycling, while Venusmon can buy you multiple turn grace periods. But for me, There is one other Digimon that I'm surprised some players aren't playing, though this falls more in line with the 4th place build, and also running an additional Protoform or X-antibody. Because Agumon X can search out cards with X-antibody in its name, this also means that besides the option card, Numemon, and monzaemon, you could introduce a top-end line with Magnamon X. While useless with your normal Digivolution stack, the X-antibody option card adds an additional recovery when Magnamon would be deleted, and creating another float back to your level 5 before it could float again into Numemon. Combo this with the Protoform as you resolve the when it would be deleted, you can recover 2 security. Not to mention, while it does have the X-antibody, that's infinite redirects. In the mirror match, your opponent must have Waru monzaemon to out it. But again, this is only if you're considering using the Black Agumon X and upping your X-antibody count. Largely for your level 7 top end, these were all over the place. Some in my opinion have more justification than others. For your typical variants, Shine Greymon Ruin Mode and Death Xmon are the top contenders, considering Ruin Mode can blanket bomb the field of a DP reduction when digivolving and after it's deleted. Death Xmon is splashable in many decks, and if you're locked out by Chikurimon, you can digivolve it on your Platinum Numemons if you really want to. Alejandro's 8th place list went as far as not running a single level 7, while Nicholas's 4th place list opted not to run any of the mentioned level 7s, and instead used Omnimon Merciful Mode and Quartzmon. Merciful Mode is best in the Leviamon matchup, while Quartzmon can shut down the red hybrid matchups by suspending the Tamers. Granted, the BT12 Emperor Greymon can easily circumvent this on a warped Digivolve with BT7 Takuya. I don't think that there's a right or wrong way to select your level 7s, mainly because they're also matchup dependent and predominantly one techs. Maybe there's a need for them, maybe there isn't. It's a mixed discussion point for me. For option cards, I strongly prefer the Protoform X-antibody over the regular BT9 one, because typically you aren't attacking and digivolving simultaneously. It also adds some recovery in a way that when your Digimon stack is deleted, and allows you to recycle your X-antibody variant Digimon. But the last point of discussion is going to go to Tamers, where although every player ran 5 Tamers, it ultimately became a mix between Lua Wada, Satsuki Tamahime, or in Nicholas's 4th place build, Cool Boy. Again, I haven't playtested with Cool Boy considering this does have a lot of searchability for the deck. The only downside is Agumon X whiffs on this search, which might explain why the ratios were at 3 instead of 4 copies. 2 to 3 copies of Satsuki Tamahime is the sweet spot, and I would not run less than 2 considering it can be a rush body for game with BT14 Numemon. And last but not least, Lua Wada adds another promote and memory gain. But to conclude, one thing that may have led Nicholas's success to 4th place may be the increased draw power associated with Cool Boy and Agumon X, while the other Numemon variants slightly lag behind in draw power. While true that these vast differences might not have anything to do with them winning their matches, it could also be that they happen to get matched up in more positively favored ones. After all, how many times have we seen a Leviamon X vs Numemon matchup from one table end with Numemon winning it, only to jump to a second table immediately after for a Leviamon X player to triumphantly walk away? Generally speaking, did you enjoy how the data was presented for a meta deck profile this week, utilizing elements that worked along with the added spice that is player preference? And are you going to be trying out some of the card combinations that I discussed here? Let me know in the comments, and once again, do consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and hitting that notification bell for more future content. This is DIGI-PANDA, logging out.